As we mentioned earlier, the two officers involved in the fatal shooting of Rayshard Brooks are now facing multiple charges. Former officer Garrett Rolfe is facing felony murder and aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, aggravated assault for kicking Brooks, 4 counts of violation of the oath of a public officer. He's also facing 4 additional charges because a third shot that he fired, that bullet hit an occupied vehicle in the Wendy's parking lot. The second officer, Devin Bronson, faces 3 counts of aggravated assault. The question now is, did the officers act in self-defense or not? Joining us to help answer that question is the legal affairs reporter at the Washington Times, Alex Swoyer. Alex, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So let's start with this. Is there, from a legal standpoint, where does the law come down on whether or not these officers, there's precedent for this kind of thing to happen, or whether or not they were justified in using deadly force?
Yeah, I think there's a few instances I can point to that look like the district attorney might have his case kind of be crumbling before him. First, we had him come out yesterday and say that he was going to have, I think it was Officer Bronson, testify as a state witness. Now we've been told that that's not the case by that officer's attorney. So that's one big issue. There's also precedent. I found 2 2016 incidents where officers had shot and killed somebody. One was an unarmed, a naked veteran, so obviously not carrying any sort of deadly weapon. And that officer was charged with murder and aggravated assault. The jury acquitted the officer of murder, but did find him guilty of aggravated assault. That resulted in a 12-year sentence. Now, the other incident I think is very comparable here because you have an officer who shot a man who had used pepper spray on the officer. In this incident, we have Brooks who, although he was running away, he turned, had the officer's taser, and fired it at the officer. After an investigation in the 2016 incident with the pepper spray, they found that the shooting by the officer was justified. So I would say, my question is, if using pepper spray against an officer led to a justifiable shooting, then what about a taser?
Right.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about that, the DA said that a taser isn't considered a deadly weapon, but under Georgia law, it is considered a deadly weapon. And so a little bit of a difference there that the officer was using according to law, which would be an equal force for force.
Right, and the Georgia law, it's not necessarily specific to naming, what can you have, what sort of device is deadly, right? It's all about if an officer has a reasonable belief, or anyone for that matter has a reasonable belief that their life is in danger, or a fear of serious bodily injury. With that even said, the Atlanta police policy was updated last week, and it discussed, when an officer can use deadly force. And it said when there's a fear of serious bodily injury with any sort of device. Now, we do know tasers, they have caused death. It's not, a significant number of them, but it can cause death. So yes, it is something that I think is going to go well for the officer in his self-defense charge to say, that he could have been, had his own taser used against him, been debilitated, and then the suspect could have taken his own firearm and used it against him. So he did have a fear for his life or the other officer.
Alex, the other thing that's unique about this case is that the DA himself has some charges and some accusations pending against him. And that seems to cloud potentially the motives. He's got a tough re-election primary headed his way.
Well, I think you're right. So there's some ethic violations that he's facing. I think there was some women that have come forward too with some complaints. There's, I think, $140,000 that there's an investigation looking into about it being funneled from a nonprofit. At the same time, all of that on top of the political environment that we have right now, all of the rioting, what we saw with George Floyd, I'm sure there was pressure to come forward with charges, especially here we have significant charges, right? Felony murder. When we even saw the 9-minute video with George Floyd, which I could say from a lawyer's perspective is completely different than the videos that we've been able to see here, coming out so strong right away within the same amount of time, and even elevating the murder to what I would consider second degree right away. So, I think maybe there's not only his election pressure, the political pressure there, but also just from society and this idea of mob rule.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Well, look, I have no doubt that this case is going to take quite a while, and it'll be interesting to see where what the legal defenses are and where this thing's come down. So I hope you can come back soon and give us an update on where you see this case headed. Thank you.
Of course. Thanks.
You bet.
All right, well, changing gears now. How much of a lead does Joe Biden really have in the polls? Trump campaign pollster Jim McLaughlin has the latest polling numbers. He's up next. And later, he bills himself as a liberty-loving Latino. Newsmax's own Chris Salcedo is in the house to talk about the Supreme Court's decision on DACA. Stay with us.